look over the crowd here and see many familiar faces in the press and the people who are supporting Julian today, so thank you. Julian, we've taken upon ourselves a noble task. We've taken upon ourselves a noble task which falls into two parts. First, to free Julian from the Niagara of malice that emanates from the Crown Prosecuting Service. Also, to allow ourselves to have a free press wherein we can draw upon information to exchange with us, our friends and family, enable us to make proper and good decisions on our own behalf, our friends' behalf and our family's behalf. All Julian's family, and it's grown to an extended families from the affections that we receive from you, will be here for the extradition hearing tomorrow, so you'll get to meet them. You'll get to meet them all. This is so. Julian and I, a couple of years ago, at Christmas time, we speculated that if we could join together and go on the Camino de Santiago, the walk of St. James, starting in the Pyrenees and ending up at Santiago. Well, Julian couldn't wait for me. So he's embarked upon the walk, and each day he traverses the length of his prison cell to accumulate the number of steps between the recognised parts on the Camino de Santiago. The rest of the time spent reviewing as possible his evidence and meditating to keep the spirit calm. So I bring to you his affection, his nobility of purpose, and his strength of character after 9 years, well now it's 10. I don't really understand why Julian is in jail here. The 10 days in Wandsworth prison of solitary confinement back in 2010 were arbitrary detention. The 7.5 years in the embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy, as an asylee, were arbitrary detention. This was brought before us by the Working Group on the United Nations on arbitrary detention. The United Kingdom, in their wisdom, tried to defeat this, but their project was rejected, and the Working Group issued another statement of support last year. Nils Melzer, the rapporteur, UN rapporteur, United Nations rapporteur on torture, that's on torture, released his report saying that Julian had undergone years of psychological torture, increasing in intensity, until the year before Julian left the embassy. Every single moment of his life, of meetings with lawyers, sitting at the table having dinner with me, was recorded both in video and sound. This is appalling. The UN rapporteur on torture, in his report, pointed out that this should not happen. This is against the law. Every single human right of Julian's has been arbitrarily broken. Distortions of procedure, falsification of witness statements, the lot, the whole rotten lot of it. We believe that your presence, the presence of the observers, and your strength of will buoy us up to make it plain to the Crown Prosecuting Service that extradition best be dropped now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. We now have Deepa Driver, a trade unionist, who's here to say a few words about a letter to Boris Johnson about Julian Assange. Deepa.
Thank you. I'm here to share a letter on behalf of international jurists from countries as far-flung as Iceland to Australia, Malaysia through to the United Kingdom, the United States, many different parts of the world, France, Germany. And we are here to, the jurists wish to protest and condemn the involvement of the United Kingdom in the long-term severe psychological torture of Julian Assange. They condemn the disregard shown by the British authorities towards British and international law. They condemn the disregard of British authorities towards Mr. Assange's right to a fair and free trial and his right to freedom of speech. And they are deeply worried about the sweeping, extraordinary, extraterritorial claims made by the United States, who are seeking to prosecute in the US under US law without First Amendment protections non-US citizens for activities undertaken in jurisdictions where such conduct might even be legal. So I'm here on behalf of them to say to you, we welcome other international jurists joining people like Eva Joly, Julian Barnes, Lisa Longstaff, Thomas Peru, Diane Roman, Philippe Texier, Craig Tuck, Mara Verheyden Hilliard, and others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deepa. Our next speaker is Tim Dawson from the National Union of Journalists. Tim.
Thank you very much. What a fantastic sight this is. How brilliant to see so many people. A little while ago, I attended a demonstration outside Belmarsh Prison. I don't know how many of you have been there, but it is a thoroughly miserable place from the outside. And the wind howled and the rain came down, and perhaps there were 30 of us there protesting about Julian Assange's incarceration. And I confess, despite the kind of inbuilt optimism I have as a British trades unionist of the past 3 or 4 decades, I couldn't help but feel a bit gloomy that there weren't more people there. What a delight to see that everybody was waiting for slightly better weather and improved transport links. Thank you all so much for being here. This begins to feel like a movement. I'm here today representing the National Union of Journalists in Britain and Ireland and the International Federation of Journalists, which represents 600,000 journalists from around the world. And our need to speak out is because of the profound danger to free speech that this extradition represents. There is much to be frightened about in respect of free speech in this country at the moment. Government ministers feel able to ignore mainstream political programmes which want to ask them questions about the decisions they're making on our behalf. The Prime Minister feels that it's acceptable to decide which journalists he wants to have at official civil service briefings. There's talk of a new Official Secrets Act. There is bullying talk towards the BBC about its future funding. But at the pinnacle of these threats to free speech is the threat to extradite Julian Assange to the United States of America, where he might serve 175 years in prison for publishing the truth. I'm aware that there are people who feel uncomfortable lending their support to Julian Assange. There are people who remain concerned about things that happened in Sweden, or about where the data came from, or about whether all this is part of some geopolitical game. I say at this moment those concerns are no longer relevant. All that matters is the risk that a foreign power could snatch somebody from this country and subject them to a legal system that has within its provisions that are more like those of a medieval state than a modern state. The message that we need to send out with clear voice to the judiciary and to our government is that if you believe that due process underpins justice, don't extradite Assange. If you believe that we have a right to know about military actions undertaken in our name, don't extradite Assange. If you believe the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, that there is someone in Belmarsh prison who has been subjected to psychological torture, then do not extradite Assange. If you believe the opinion of more than 60 doctors who say that the health of the founder of WikiLeaks should be a greater concern than the bizarre legal instruments being used to try and take him to the United States, then don't extradite Assange. And if you believe that a judicial snatch squad is an anathema to free expression and a free press, then don't extradite Assange. I know that we live in quite dark times. We have a dishonest Prime Minister, we have an impending economic crisis, but I also know that the power of protest can make a difference. It was his fellow inmates in Belmarsh who took a petition to the governor there saying that they believed that Julian Assange's treatment was inhuman and demanding that he be taken out of solitary confinement. If they can do it, then so can we. Keep up the pressure, keep up the protests, and if we do, justice will prevail.
Thank you, Tim. Our next speaker is one of the most successful fashion designers in the world and a leading name in the global fashion industry. She's well known for her political activism and her support for Julian Assange's freedom. Comrades, please welcome Vivienne Westwood.
It's too high. As low as possible, please. That's better. Okay. And I should stand back. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. So I am Vivienne, angel of democracy. This is the most important case in history, in human history, in the history of the animals and all the life forces on this planet. If we can get Julian out, it can crack the wall of corruption, and we can ask for all the other things we need to save the planet from mass extinction and death of the planet. He is the Trojan horse. We need to break that wall for justice. Okay? So, this case is the scales of justice. On one side is democracy, and on the other is totalitarianism. Julian Assange was illegally dragged from the Ecuadorian embassy. As John Pilger says, imagine if Tony Blair had been pulled out of there. That would have been a good idea. Yeah, okay. and locked up in solitary confinement in Belmarsh top security prison. At this point, the media began to recognise that Julian is a victim of illegal abuse sanctioned by government. It is not a crime to publish American war crimes. It is in the public interest. Corbyn is clear. Don't extradite. I feel worried about Boris Johnson, who is an icon of irresponsibility. He takes no notice of anybody and listens only to his demon who farts out of his arse. And I'm frightened that he will just bluff his way out of ever making any decision or comment, just as he always does and never listens to people. Corbyn is pro-democracy. The US wants to rule a totalitarian world. Right now, the government of America, for the government of America, people are the enemy. Free Assange, rock and roll.
Thank you, Vivienne. Our next speaker today is one of Iceland's leading investigative journalists who has been named Icelandic Journalist of the Year 3 times by the National Union of Journalists in Iceland. He's also the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks. Comrades, please welcome Kristinn Hrafnsson.
Hello, London. Thanks for being here today. It's so important. It's so good to see you out here, all of you. We are going to win this fight. Remember, when the Spanish company that was hired to oversee the security of Julian Assange decided to turn on him and spying on him instead, the relationship he had with his doctors and lawyers, all was monitored, all was gathered, all was sent to the United States. This was paid for by the biggest financial backer of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, and now Mike Pompeo. Spying on Assange. And the staff of the company knew exactly who they were working for, where the material would go to. It would go to the CIA. In internal emails, they said, we are now working for the dark force. And that is exactly what we're dealing with today. We're dealing with the dark force. We're dealing with the dark force that is growing in its power and its overreach. It's a dark force that decides that they can assassinate people, high-level officials in foreign countries, with drone attacks. It's a dark force who kills children in war zones. It's a dark force that with impunity assassinate Reuters journalists, as we exposed in the collateral murder video. It's a dark force that now wants Julian extradited to the United States and thrown in a cell to spend the rest of his days there. We must stop it. We must stop this force. This is not about left or right in politics. We can unite on this. It's a dark force versus us who want justice, transparency, accountability, and truth. We have the momentum with us. Please tell everybody that you know that they have to side with Assange and fight against his extradition. If they tell you, I would rather fight for the environment or against animal cruelty or gender equality, tell them they are about to take every right away from you. You will not be able to fight for any other cause. We are talking about the fundamentals here. We must fight against the extradition. We must save Julian Assange.
Thank you, Kristinn. It's my absolute privilege to introduce you to our next speaker, the legendary frontman and co-founder of Pink Floyd, Roger Waters.
Wow. Look at you all. I've actually written some things down, which I've never done before in my life, but I'm taking this very seriously. So, but it's fantastic to see you guys all here today. I feel a real strength and warmth coming from everybody in this little gathering here. And it was a huge honour to walk down the Strand and down Whitehall with you all. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. I know we're here for Julian Assange. All right, bear with me. I've got some names on this piece of paper, people to whom I wish to refer. The first, of course, is Julian Assange himself, a journalist, a courageous shiner of light into the dark places from which the powers that be would dearly like to have us turn away. Julian Assange, a name to be carved with pride into any monument to human progress. Julian is why we are here today, but this is no parochial project. We are today part of a global movement that might be the beginning of the global enlightenment that this fragile planet so desperately needs. Okay, second name, sent to me by my good friend Vijay Prashad. I was just talking to Tariq Ali down here, who's also a good friend of Vijay's. Anyway, this is a young man none of us know. His name is, I suspect, his name is Amir Aziz, and he is a young poet and activist in Delhi. He's involved in the fight against Modi and his fascist, racist citizenship law. I'll read a little bit of one of his poems. Amir says, "Everything will be remembered. Kill us, we will become ghosts and write of your killings, with all the evidence. You write jokes in court, we will write justice on the walls. We will speak so loudly that even the deaf will hear. We will write so clearly that even the blind will read. You write injustice on the earth. We will write revolution in the sky." I think this kid's got a future. Anyway, can I have a sip of water? Thank you. Take this outpouring of the human spirit from India is taking place in a time of revolt when the fetters of propriety are set aside. Thank you so much. Christ, it looks like it's going to bite my nose. Wow. Thank you. Okay. Also, as we meet here in London, across the Atlantic in Argentina, thousands of women are taking to the streets to demand the legalization of abortion from President Fernandez. More power to them. It's not just Argentina. This last year, we've seen major protests erupt across the whole world against the neoliberal fascist regimes. In Chile, in the Lebanon, Colombia, Ecuador, Haiti, France, and now, of course, also in Bolivia, fighting the new US-imposed military dictatorship there. When will we see the name of England appended to that noble list? I sense the scratching of heads in drawing rooms across the home counties. What's he talking about? The man's a bloody pinko pervert, bloody anti-Semite. What's he talking about? We don't live in a dictatorship. This is a free country, a democracy with all the finest traditions of fair play. Well, I've got news for you, disgruntled of Tunbridge Wells. We like to think this is a free country, but are we really free? Why? When Julian Assange is brought to the dock in the tiny magistrate's court inside Belmarsh prison, there are so many seats occupied by anonymous American suits, whispering instructions into the attentive ear of the prosecution's lead barrister, James Lewis, QC. Why? Because we don't live in a free country. We live in a glorified dog kennel. And we bark and or wag our tails at the bidding of our lords and masters across the pond. What? Well, hang on. I've only just started. All right, I'll read a bit more. By popular demand. I stand here today in front of the Mother of Parliaments, and there she stands, blushing in all her embarrassment. And just upstream from here is anywhere. There's all kinds of stuff about Runnymede and Magna Carta and habeas corpus and blah, 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 blah. And then the next page starts off. We do, however, have an extradition treaty with the USA in the first paragraph of Article 4, blah, 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 extradition, blah, 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 political act, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this bit's more entertaining. Yesterday, in front of Battersea Power Station with my pig, I did a tea interview for Sky News to promote this event. There was no visual link, so my only contact with the lady asking me questions was via an earbud on a curly wire. I learned something about telling truth in the phrasing of her questions to me. She came at me like some crazed Don Quixote, every question laced thick with the smears and innuendo and the false accusations with which the powers that be have been trying to blacken Julian Assange's name. She rattled off the tired but well-prepared narrative and then interrupted constantly when I made reply. I don't know who she is. She may mean well. If she does, my advice to her would be to stop drinking the Kool-Aid, and if she actually gives a fig for her chosen profession, get her sorry ass down here and join us. I've nearly finished. I'm sorry. Okay. So, England. I call upon our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, to declare his colours. Does he support the spirit of Magna Carta? Democracy, freedom, fair play, free speech, and especially the freedom of the press? If the answer to these questions is yes, then come on, Prime Minister! Be the British bulldog that you would have us all believe you are. Stand up to the bluster of American hegemony. Call off this show trial, this charade, this kangaroo court. The evidence before the court is incontrovertible. Julian Assange is an innocent man. Okay, I've nearly found it. Blah, 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 blah. Call on you to free him today, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I cannot leave this stage without mention of Chelsea Manning, who provided some of the material that Julian published. Chelsea has been in a federal prison for a year, incarcerated by the Americans for refusing on principle to give evidence to a grand jury specifically convened to make an example of Julian Assange. What courage. They're also fining her $1,000 a day. Chelsea, from across the pond, yours is another name to be carved in pride. I've been reading the latest on your case, and it looks as if your legal team, blah, 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 blah. True hero. One more. Also Daniel Hale. Daniel is a whistleblower you may not know of yet. He was in a great documentary movie, National Bird, Sonia Kennebec, blah, 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 drone program, blah, 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 blah. They pursued him remorselessly, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Oh, yeah, I like this bit. Hang on. Daniels is another name to be carved in pride. Those of us who have never compromised our liberty in the cause of freedom, who have never picked up the burning torch and held it trembling over the crimes of their superior officers, can only wonder at the extraordinary courage of those who have. All right. Okay. So, yeah. There are other speakers here, blah, 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 dying of the light, bulldog light, arms, comrade Julian Assange. And when the lackeys of the American empire come to take him, to destroy him, and hang him in the hedge as a warning to frighten future journalists, we will look them in the eye and steadfast, with one voice, we will intone, "Over our dead bodies!"
Thank you, Roger Waters. Our next speaker is veteran anti-war campaigner, journalist and filmmaker. He's a leading figure of the British anti-war and anti-imperialist movement. Comrades, please welcome Tariq Ali.
Friends, as the 21st century grows older, what do we see? I think we are living now in an age that can be defined as the age of coercion. Whether you live in a democratic state where elections and rituals like it take place, or whether you live in other parts of the world. Effectively, the United States, the dominant power in the globe, has decided that what it wants, it will do. And in Trump, they have elected a president who doesn't wear a mask. He says these things quite openly, things which sometimes upset the liberals in the United States and his liberal opponents, because they would prefer to wear a mask to prettify the reality. He says it clearly. What we want, we're going to get. And what we are watching now, in the case of Julian Assange, Julian's lawyer announced only a few days ago that an offer was made from Trump via a congressman who said that if he gave the Russians a clean bill of health, all the charges would be dropped. So Trump knows, and the American administration knows, that this is a farce. It's something you use to get something from someone else. If you give me what I want, you can go free. The same criteria is being applied to another form of coercion. And that coercion is the trade war which the United States is conducting against China. And that also involves extradition. One of the leading one of the leading people in the Chinese firm Huawei, which poses a threat to American trade interests, was picked up in Canada, locked up, and is waiting extradition to the United States, despite the fact that China, unlike Britain, is a major state in the world. It's not a stooge state. It's not a satrapy. It doesn't do the United States' bidding. They're doing this to China. And again, the message has gone out. If you make some concessions, not specified, that we need, we will release her. So the notion that this has anything to do with law is untrue. It's a lie. The reason Julian Assange, as we have stated many a time over the last few years, despite the slanderers of the mainstream media, who should be ashamed of themselves for the coverage that they have given Assange, because they will suffer themselves. And here I would say that some of those who have been the worst have been the liberal media. I have to say this, The Guardian, which used Julian Assange to publish all the material that Chelsea Manning had sent him, the New York Times, should have waged a campaign and should be waging a campaign to demand Assange's release. And these parliamentarians sitting inside the House of Commons blindly now with the huge Tory majority voting through whatever is put above them. I would say, I would echo what Roger has said and say to Boris Johnson, you actually have been a journalist yourself. We may not agree with what you wrote, and I never did, but you know what it is to publish a piece which annoys people, which irritates people. And are you prepared to sit silently and acquiesce in this judicial farce that is about to begin in a few hours' time? Are you going to do that? Because if you do, effectively you're opening the door to the United States being able to pick any foreign journalist from anywhere and demand his or her extradition. This is what is going to happen. So it's extremely short-sighted, this trial that is taking place. And why is the trial taking place at all? Because in this age of coercion, one of the most grotesque forms of coercion is war. Occupying countries, organizing regime changes because you don't like the people who are in power at the moment, even though you put them there several years ago. And you wage war and you kill millions of people. And when brave journalists or brave soldiers, as Chelsea Manning then was, expose your wrongdoings, you arrest them and punish them so that this doesn't happen again. We must do our best to prevent Julian Assange being extradited. That goes without saying. But one thing they should remember, the powers that be, the concert of powers, those who rule over us, one thing they must remember, that despite the fact that they have organized and promoted this epoch of coercion to get their own way, there will always be people, regardless of what you do to Julian Assange, who will come out one day when the atrocities are no longer acceptable and expose you. And that is why, join with me, so that they can hear beyond these streets, don't extradite Assange. Come on. Once more, louder. Don't extradite Assange.
Thank you, Tariq. Our next speaker is one of the most important left-wing intellectuals in Britain. She is a veteran anti-war campaigner and the convener of the Stop the War Coalition. Comrades, please welcome Lindsey German.
Can you bring it down? Thank you. Thank you very much for everybody who's turned out today. I'm here from the Stop the War Coalition to say two very, very simple things. The first is that we owe Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning a huge debt as the anti-war movement because they have exposed only some, but some of the war crimes of our closest ally in the United States of America. The killing of Iraqis, the killing of Afghans, the destruction of whole towns and villages by people, the bombing which is still going on in Afghanistan. This is the kind of thing that they have exposed. And that is exactly the reason why Julian Assange is lying now in Belmarsh and faces the threat of extradition to the United States of America, where it is impossible for him to get any kind of fair trial or any kind of decent treatment. So everybody who opposed the war in Iraq, everybody who opposed the war in Afghanistan, everybody who opposes their continued wars in Yemen and across the Middle East and the way in which the Israelis are treating the Palestinians, everyone who opposes all of those things has to be in favour of supporting Julian Assange. Because what he did was to expose them. And I find it one of the most grotesque miscarriages of justice that Julian Assange is in Belmarsh, Chelsea Manning is in prison, yet Tony Blair has made millions out of his career as a war criminal. Alistair Campbell is on every television programme you care to watch. These are the people who should be in prison. They should be at The Hague being tried for war crimes. And it's the people who are the whistleblowers who should be free and should be able to walk the streets. So this is a huge injustice, and this is a hugely important demonstration today, just 2 days before the trial starts, because we are saying we are not going to accept this injustice. We are not going to accept it because they've exposed the truth, but also because there is no civil liberty in extraditing people to the United States. What an incredible extradition treaty it is that 200 people from Britain have been extradited that way, only 11 from the United States back here. And when a CIA agent killed a young guy on his motorbike, the British government can't even extradite her for trial, but they want to extradite Assange. That is not justice. It's not justice at all. And we have to be very, very vigilant about this because we have a vicious Tory government. These are people who are deporting guys who were brought to this country at a young age from Jamaica, who've never been to Jamaica, who've been involved in petty crime, and now are being sent back there because they've committed these crimes. This is the kind of way, the hostile environment to immigrants, the way the Windrush generation are treated, the way the Grenfell people are treated. This is a racist government, pure and simple, and it will hand over Assange to Trump unless we stop it. So our job is to demonstrate today, to demonstrate this week, to keep demonstrating, to keep fighting, to keep telling these MPs in Parliament we are not going to give up. We do not want to see Julian Assange extradited. Not only that, he shouldn't be in prison at all. Why the hell is he in a high security prison down in Belmarsh? He should be freed instantly, and that should be the demand we all put. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lindsey. Our next speaker is one of the most innovative and successful musicians in the UK. He's a well-known political activist and is a tireless campaigner against wars and social injustice. He's also the president of the Stop the War Coalition. Comrades, please welcome Brian Eno.
Hello. Thank you all for coming, really. Vivienne Westwood was not really exaggerating when she said this is an incredibly important case, because really if we fail in this, if Assange gets extradited, that is the beginning of the end of a free press, I think. So we have to ask, why has Assange been a prisoner for 10 years? 10 years, that's a long, long time. And in that time, he's frequently asked to see the Swedish government to try to sort out that case, about which, by the way, they never brought any charges. They've never been able to meet him for some reason, like they were ill, or the dog ate their homework, or something like that. It's been an absolute parody of a case, this complete corruption. I don't know if any of you saw the what Nils Melzer, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, wrote. He said that when he was first approached about the Assange case, he wasn't inclined to look at it because he thought it was maybe Assange trying to get a bit of publicity and make a bit of trouble. When he was approached a second time, he did look at the case, and he said he had been reluctant to believe that England and Sweden, countries that he thought were civilized and progressive, would have engaged in such corrupt practices as they have done. He went to see Assange and declared that he was suffering from severe psychological torture, as bad as he had seen in any country. So this is England. We are doing this. We're torturing. So the question is, why did we single out Assange for this kind of treatment? You know, surely it wasn't that bad, was it? We singled him out, I think, because we're drifting towards totalitarianism. And the total in totalitarianism is about total control, particularly total control of information. Totalitarians do not want free speech. They want to know that you all hear the same story, their story. And Assange was not telling the same story. In fact, he was saying that story is a bunch of lies. So I think we're being groomed now. We're being groomed for a future in which we stop protesting about assassinations by drone, as we've been doing in Afghanistan. We stop protesting about imprisonment without charge. We stop protesting about murdered activists, as we're seeing in Brazil. We stop protesting about torture, which has made a return in the last 20 years. We stop protesting about violent attacks on peaceful demonstrations, which we're seeing in Israel all the time. We stop protesting about journalists being denied access unless they're sympathetic, which we're happy to now to do in England, apparently. And in general, we give up the fight to have free information, to actually know the truth about what's going on. That's what we're being groomed for, and unfortunately the press seems to be quite happy to accept everything that is leading in that direction. It's extremely disappointing that the press haven't responded, and the media in general haven't responded more rigorously. It's, to me personally, extremely disappointing that I'm always talking at these bloody things, and it's always the same few people talking with me. It's always Yanis or Tariq, or, you know, the same fucking faces. You think, where are the rest of you? You're watching fucking Netflix or something. So I want to just read a little bit from a short piece from an interview that Nils Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, did with a magazine called Republic. I really recommend the whole piece. It's a very strong piece. So he was asked the question, are you saying that Julian Assange won't receive a fair trial in the United States? He answered, so listen to this, it's very interesting. He said, without doubt, for as long as the employees of the American government obey the orders of their superiors, they can participate in wars of aggression, war crimes and torture, knowing full well that they will never have to answer to their actions. What happened to the lessons learned in the Nuremberg trials? It is extremely dangerous when the truth is suppressed and criminals are not brought to justice. In the 1930s, Germany and Japan left the League of Nations. 15 years later, the world lay in ruins. Today, the US has withdrawn from the UN Human Rights Council, and neither the collateral murder massacre nor the CIA tortures following 9/11, nor the war of aggression against Iraq have led to any criminal investigations. Now, the United Kingdom too is following that example. The Security and Intelligence Committee in the country's own parliament, that one there, published 2 extensive reports in 2018 showing that Britain was much more deeply involved in the secret CIA torture program than previously believed. The committee recommended a formal investigation. The first thing that Boris Johnson did after he became Prime Minister was to annul that investigation. This is where we're standing now. We're right on the edge of a cliff, I think. If we fall on this one, it'll be very hard to get back out. So, don't extradite Assange.
Thank you, Brian. Our next speaker needs no introduction. He's Julian Assange's friend. Comrades, please welcome Yanis Varoufakis.
Leaking powers guilty secrets is not a phrase, it is a sentence. And no one is facing a longer sentence than Julian Assange for doing that precisely. Now, Julian has gained the right to quote from another prisoner, from another time, from another enemy of empire, Mahatma Gandhi. Julian, like Gandhi, could say, you can chain me, you can torture me, you can destroy my body, but you can't imprison my mind. Well, Julian, you have won the right to say this, but we don't have the right to agree with him. We have a duty. We have a duty to stop them from destroying Julian's body. We have a duty not to let them continue his torture. Comrades, first they came for Julian. Next, they will come for our comrades, our friends, our neighbors. Immediately after that, they will come for the good people of The Guardian and of the BBC. They will go after anyone who dares challenge the right of power of the oligarchy without frontiers to commit crimes against humanity in our name without our knowledge. Do you remember some months ago, Mike Pompeo? Let me remind you who that gentleman is. He was Trump's first choice for CIA director and currently the Secretary of State. He described WikiLeaks as a non-governmental, hostile intelligence service. You know what? He's right. This is exactly what WikiLeaks is. But also, it is exactly what any self-regarding newspaper, television station, radio station should be. A non-governmental intelligence service on behalf of citizens that are looking critically at their government. Dan Ellsberg, that wonderful whistleblower, one of my greatest heroes, and Noam Chomsky, another hero of ours. They warned the journalists who are failing so spectacularly to defend Julian today. They warned them, you are next. You are on a hit list with a ranking order, the hit list of President Trump, who considers all of the press to be the enemy of the people. When you turned a blind eye to Julian's torture, you are consenting to your own emasculation. That is our message to the BBC. That is our message to The Guardian. Of course, you do not need me to lecture you, because by being here, you have proven that you know all that. But you've also acquired a duty, we all have, to let into the secret those who are not here today. Because, you know, Julian's worst enemy, freedom's worst enemy, are not evil people in smoke-filled rooms plotting against good people. No. Julian's worst enemy, freedom's worst enemy, is apathy. It is fatigue. It is good people, too tired, too exhausted, too disheartened, working 0-hour contracts, whatever, to be able to expend the energy that you and I have the privilege of expending today. It is banality. It is people who are neither good nor bad working in these offices in Whitehall. No, they're not evil. They're just banal. Too banal to care. We have to make them care. On a slightly personal note, I got to know Julian Assange when he took an interest in me, because some years ago, some of you may have heard about this, I blew the whistle on the European finance ministers' cabal who were plotting behind closed doors, turning against the interests of their people, not just the Greek people, but the German people, the French people, everyone, behind closed doors. On the 10th of March, in a few days' time, one of the projects that Julian and I started is going to see the light of day. Watch out for EuroLeaks. Soon after we met, together with Brian Eno, who hates being in this very small clique, but it's not a small clique, because as Brian knows, what we started with Julian Assange in February 2016 in Berlin, the Democracy in Europe movement, now has tens of thousands of members everywhere. As we speak, a similar demonstration is taking place in Athens with our members of parliament representing the movement that Julian Assange helped to put together. Tomorrow, I'm going to be in Belmarsh, visiting together with John Shipton, Julian's magnificent father, Julian. I will go in there with trepidation and a sense of guilt, because I'm going to walk in there, but I'm also going to walk out of there. And I'm going to relay to him your spirit, the spirit of everyone from every European country and beyond. Because you may be out of the EU, but you are firmly embedded in Europe's progressive movement. Friends, comrades, as my friend and Julian's friend, Philip Adams from Australia, said recently, we are not going to let them turn Julian into a latter-day man in the iron mask or a man forgotten in an iron cell. So stiffen your upper lip. We are in the business of allowing unalloyed, unarmed truth to have the final word. Because we are in the business of creating the circumstances so that Julian's sentence will end neither with a bang nor with a whimper, but with a magnificent full stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanis. Our next speaker is widely regarded as one of UK's finest hip-hop artists. He's a fearless political activist, and that sets him apart from all his contemporaries. He's a patron of the Stop the War Coalition and the voice of the Palestinians. Comrades, please welcome Lowkey.
Thank you very much. Just to start off with, can we please give a massive round of applause to John Shipton and the family of Julian Assange. Please give a massive, massive round of applause. We want to salute you. We want to salute you. And we are in awe of your courage and your strength in the face of what is unprecedented state manipulation and psychological warfare. I'd like to start by reading a small excerpt from a poem by Mahmoud Darwish, The Music of Human Flesh. Oh, you with bloodshot eyes and bloody hands, night is short-lived. The detention room lasts not forever, nor yet the links of chains. As was said earlier, they may try to take Julian Assange's life, but they will not take his soul. If I can speak as an Iraqi, watching the footage in 2010 of the collateral murder video, what we saw for the first time was a truth that we knew. The United States military were killing civilians, even if they were employees of Reuters news agency and they were journalists. They were being mowed down in the streets. We knew it to be true. In the Falklands War of 1982, there were 2 photojournalists that were sent by Margaret Thatcher. No television broadcasts were allowed. there was an orthodoxy that is clung to by those in the military establishment, that the reason for the horrific and traumatic to the US military establishment defeat in Vietnam was the access that journalists had to be able to put those pictures out to the public and the people here in the metropoles to rise up and protest against what their governments were doing. How can we forget it was the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign that mobilized over 100,000 people to the streets of this country to stop Harold Wilson sending the British Army to join the United States in the Vietnam War. The orthodoxy that has been clung to is that the media establishment must be mouthpieces for the Ministry of Defense. They must uncritically reproduce verbatim the press releases they are given by the Ministry of Defense. How many journalists among us are guilty of that crime to journalism, merely reproducing the words of the powerful? We know that the sales of newspapers are going this way. How are newspapers making their money? Through advertisements on the internet. Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were responsible for millions of files becoming public property. How many oil adverts were put on the pages of The Guardian on the back of Julian Assange's stories and works for WikiLeaks? How much money did these same newspapers that are hanging him out to dry, that are clamoring for his execution, how much money have they got from major oil companies to advertise them for them on their pages? We look at Sajid Javid and his responsibility, and we know that one of the criteria in which the British government are permitted to block an extradition is if the penalty that a person may face would be the death penalty. Now, Sajid Javid has received £31,000 from the American Enterprise Institute, neocon, right-wing institute. Jonah Goldberg, who is a fellow there, said the words clearly. WikiLeaks is easily among the most significant and well-publicized breaches of American national security since the Rosenbergs gave the Soviets the bomb. So again, I ask, why hasn't Assange been garroted in his hotel room? It's a serious question. Do you know what they did to the Rosenbergs? They killed them. They killed them. This is what we are fighting for. We are fighting for the life of Julian Assange. If he is left to the devices of the US establishment, we do not know what will happen to him. Hillary Clinton said, why can't we just treat them like terrorists? Mitch McConnell of the AEI said also that Assange was a high-tech terrorist. Do you know what in the war of terror, the terrorist as a loose category and definition has been? It has been a state of exception whereby habeas corpus has meant nothing, whereby the Magna Carta has been thrown out of the window and may well have been turned into a paper plane for Tony Blair to play with George Bush. It means nothing to those that are in prison now. 70 to 80% of the people in prison for terrorist charges in this country are in jail for non-violent offences. We're talking about literature. We're talking about pieces of work. That's what they're saying about Julian Assange, that his rights should be taken away, that he should occupy a space of rightlessness. Were it not for the WikiLeaks work, we would not know the true face of our establishment. And one last word, and this word is to Alan Duncan, who saw fit to refer to Julian Assange as a miserable little worm. Let me tell you something. Julian Assange has more courage, has more strength of spirit, has more independence, has more brilliance in his little finger than Alan Duncan has in his entire career. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lowkey. Our next speaker is ex-diplomat, writer and whistleblower Craig Murray.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Brian Eno referred to the report of the Intelligence and Security Committee and the investigation into British collusion in torture, which had been quashed by Brian Johnson immediately on taking office. I was one of the witnesses to that committee because I blew the whistle on torture and extraordinary rendition years ago, because I have seen from the inside that governments torture, governments lie, governments cheat, governments steal, governments kill, and they try to hush it up, and they try to keep it secret, and they claim that the secrets need to be kept for the security of the people, whereas in fact much of what government does is a plot against the people. Whistleblowers talk to each other. I know Daniel Ellsberg, I know Catherine Gunn, I know Ray McGovern, I know John Kiriakou. We all keep as a community together, because when you blow the whistle, your world falls apart. You're cast out from your previous career, you're cast out from your previous friendships, you're cast out from society. The government make damn sure you never get a job again. We need each other for solidarity and friendship and security, and WikiLeaks provides an essential role to the whistleblower community, not just in publishing secrets, but in providing the moral support. And I take the support you are here to give Julian Assange as also reflecting support for whistleblowers everywhere. And let us note that we're hearing this week in court evidence of possible deals that were put to Julian, and that Julian refused to give up a source on the DNC emails because he would not give up a source in the hope of securing his own freedom. And that is why WikiLeaks is trusted, and that is why Julian is trusted, not only as a great figure in the information age, but as a person of deep courage and heroism himself. The idea that a publisher is in prison for publishing nothing but the truth is astonishing. I am ashamed to be standing in the country among the institutions of the power of a country which tortures a publisher for publishing the truth, when the people who committed the crimes which he exposed are still safe, still employed by the state, and still in positions of power. This must not be allowed to stand. The tide of opinion is turning. We are now at the key point. For years, we told the world that the reason Julian had sought diplomatic asylum was because the charges levelled against him, the accusations, there were never any charges because there's never any evidence. The accusations levelled against him were nonsense, and it was all a plot to extradite him to the United States. And what did the media say? They said, no, there is no plan to extradite him to the United States. No, this isn't about that. It's about Sweden. It was always about reaching this point. And finally, we are here, and we are the ones who've been telling the world the truth for a decade. And now we know. The question is fundamentally this: can somebody be dragged off to the United States for publishing truth about war crimes and publishing that truth from out with the United States? Can anybody who publishes anything bad about the US government be dragged from anywhere in the world, taken to America to face the so-called justice of that dysfunctional political system? The answer must be no, and we must all be there at Belmarsh to support Julian and working to change the tide of opinion and secure the freedom of one of the most important leaders of intellectual thought today. Thank you.